What if Leia accompanied Luke to Dagobah during the events of The Empire Strikes Back, instead of leaving Hoth with Han Solo? How much would this alter the events of Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, along with the rest of the Star Wars timeline? For this what if story, I want to explore a narrative that I believe would be realistic, but also consistent with the George Lucas story, and how the original trilogy may look like if such an event were to occur. This will be one of many possibilities that could result of this scenario. As with all what-if stories, there is no definitive answer, as it depends on the writer and the story they want to tell. So let's enter an alternate universe of the Star Wars timeline on what if Leia went to Dagobah with Luke. Our story begins here. This is where the divergence occurs in the timeline. On Hoth, in the scene where Leia kissed Luke, it ends differently. After Leia storms off, Luke calls after her to come back. Han and Chewie leave. Leia returns to Luke's side and Luke explains that when he was in the snow, he saw Ben Kenobi, and that he was told to go to the Dagobah system to meet Master Yoda, and that he would leave her there with R2 as soon as he was released from the base infirmary. Leia would be skeptical of Luke's claims and proposes he might have hallucinated it, but Luke tells her that he's heard Ben's voice before, advising him, and it has always been right. Leia is inclined to believe him somewhat, as she heard of the real Master Yoda through old tales by her father, Bail Organa, while Luke was completely unfamiliar. Realizing she cannot stop Luke from going to Dagobah, she insisted on going. Shortly afterward, the rebels became aware that the Empire had located their base. Leia informed General Riken that she will not be joining the commanders on their transport, and she will accompany Commander Skywalker on a Jedi mission, and that she would need a Y-Wing. Riken, trusting of both Skywalker and Organa, granted her request. Han is in the room at this time. Later, after Luke returns from his doomed snowspeeder flight, Leia joins him and R2 on a Y-Wing. Since she is not staying in the command center, Han never comes looking for her and takes Chewie and 3PO on the Falcon. Vader and the 501st are still far away. Han escaped to Bespin in a last-ditch attempt to escape the Empire. The Falcon needed repairs, so he traveled to Bespin since it was closer to Hoth. Since Leia is not with him, he would have gone to Tatooine to pay off his debt to Jabba, which would be his plan in this timeline. But he wouldn't go to Tatooine with a damaged ship, seeing as it's far away. Han's plan is to repair the Falcon on Bespin and then head over to Tatooine. Luke and Leia crash-landed on Dagobah in their Y-Wing. When R2 fell into the lake, Leia joined Luke in trying to find him, but she didn't jump into the water like Luke did. She wasn't sure what was in it. They both desperately yelled out the little droid's name. Once they made it to a safe place, Leia helped Luke clean up R2 from the mud and dirt. A while after crash landing on Dagobah, Luke and Leia both expressed regret about coming to the planet, with Leia sarcastically remarking,
"You think?"
when Luke acknowledges it was a bad idea. They eventually set up camp together, with Leia helping Luke care for R2 and assisting in their survival on the planet. When Yoda first appeared to Luke and Leia on Dagobah, Luke fell for Yoda's test. Leia, however, had heard of Yoda through her adoptive father's stories, and she had a clue that this strange green alien could be Yoda, after he said that war does not make one great. Leia had heard from Bail that Yoda was a wise Jedi Master, so his response to Luke was the first clue that Leia picked up on, since she was very perceptive and in tune with the Force, more than Luke. Luke still didn't realize that the being in front of them was indeed Yoda. As Yoda continued his foolish behavior towards Luke, Leia sat back quietly, observing him, since she wasn't entirely sure if this was Yoda, but her senses were telling her otherwise. When Yoda tells Luke that he can take him to Yoda, Leia interjected and finally figured it out. She said that he already did because he is Yoda. Luke didn't believe her until Yoda quit the silly act, at which point he begged Yoda to train him to be a Jedi. Yoda told them to be patient and shared dinner with him at his hut, and Luke then told R2 to stay and watch over the camp. During Vader and the Emperor's conversation, Palpatine sensed a disturbance in the Force and acknowledged that there is another being at play. As Leia and Luke are training together, their presence and power would be amplified through the Force, and it's likely that Vader and Sidious felt it. However, they only acknowledge Luke, since they don't suspect Leia to be Force sensitive. let alone the offspring of Anakin Skywalker. At the hut, Luke continued to be impatient. When Yoda began to speak to Obi-Wan, both Luke and Leia heard them. He asked her how she could hear him, as Yoda and Obi-Wan continued their debate over training Luke. Yoda offered the possibility of training Leia instead, believing she was more patient and perceptive, with more qualities of a Jedi and fewer qualities of Vader. Luke and Leia were both stunned to learn of Leia's Force sensitivity. Leia denied that she could be Force sensitive, since she had never used the Force before. Yoda and Obi-Wan were careful not to reveal Luke and Leia's family connection, and explained that one of Leia's biological parents was a Jedi, like Luke's. Leia had inherited their powers and was hidden, adopted by Bail Organa. Leia took time to process this, but it made sense to her. The reason for not revealing Luke and Leia's sibling connection was because Obi-Wan and Yoda feared that Luke and Leia may develop a strong attachment that could lead to the dark side if something were to happen to either of them when confronting Vader, especially since they were alive in each other's presence. Unlike in the Star Wars Infinity's What If comic for The Empire Strikes Back, where Yoda immediately revealed to Leia that Luke was her brother and Vader was her father. Upon arriving on Dagobah, Yoda did not reveal their family connection at this point. This was likely because in the comic, Luke had died on Hoth, and Leia was the last hope of that timeline. So, Leia wouldn't have formed a sibling attachment with him that could have had potential consequences. Yoda was hesitant to train Luke and would have preferred to train Leia. As mentioned in the From a Certain Point of View book from the new canon, Luke suggested the idea of having both him and Leia train under Yoda, believing that two Jedi would be better than one when confronting Vader. Obi-Wan agreed with the idea, but Yoda also pointed out that Luke was already too old to begin the training. However, Luke argued that he had already learned a lot, and that Leia could also learn. She interrupted, acknowledging that Luke had a power that she couldn't understand and could never have. Yoda interjected, telling Leia that the Force was strong with her and that she had great potential. Luke promised that they wouldn't fail Yoda and that he wasn't afraid. Yoda responded by telling him that he would be. As they trained, Luke became more confident in his abilities, and Leia began to tap into her own Force powers. Yoda was pleased with their progress, but also sensed his impatience. Leia proved to be a natural at sensing things through the Force, and showed a great deal of control and patience, impressing Yoda. Meanwhile, Luke struggled with his fear and impatience, which were holding him back. But, with Yoda's guidance and Leia's support, he began to make progress in overcoming his weaknesses. One day, after finishing their training, Luke would notice a cold, dark side ambience. Leia would say she felt it as well. Yoda would tell them that they must go in, and that the only things in there would be what they take with them, and that Luke would not need his lightsaber. Carefully, the two would venture inside and split up. While Luke would see the same vision as the original timeline, him killing Vader only for his face to appear in his mask, Leia would see something unique. She would see Luke and Vader locked in a lightsaber duel, slicing and slashing at each other. Leia would want to intervene, but she had nothing with her to help. She would try to use the Force to knock Vader over, but it wouldn't work. She'd watch Vader stab and kill Luke in cold blood. The vision would then disappear. She would worry about Luke's safety and talk to Yoda about getting a lightsaber herself. He would explain that Jedi use the threat of violence as a tool and that a lightsaber is a last resort. Leia would argue that she needed one to help Luke, but Yoda would try to teach her that having a lightsaber doesn't make her more of a Jedi. Leia would ultimately insist on the practicality of learning to use a lightsaber, which eventually she needed to. Yoda would then take Leia to a nearby tree, where he would instruct her to close her eyes, concentrate, and reach out with her feelings. Suddenly, the tree's vines would strike at her, but Yoda would tell her to stop them. At first, she would try to use her physical strength, but it wouldn't work. Eventually, she would close her eyes and calm her mind, and the vines would stop. Yoda would then tell her that the Force runs through every living thing, and that a Jedi must learn to be in harmony with it, rather than using physical strength. Leia would take this lesson to heart, and realize that her true strength lies in the Force. The next morning, Yoda presented Leia with his green lightsaber and tells her that he no longer has any use for it. She noted that the saber is too small for her, but Yoda explained that she could reconstruct it with her brother's help so that it may fit her. Guided by Yoda, Luke and Leia sat facing each other in the swamp and used the Force to deconstruct, rearrange, and add to Yoda's saber until they have built a unique saber for Leia. This process was not easy, but Yoda encouraged them to persevere until they succeeded. Their next training session would be to spar with lightsabers. After weeks of rigorous training on Dagobah, Luke and Leia had made significant progress in their Jedi training. Under Yoda's guidance, they had mastered many skills and were honing their abilities to use the Force. On this day, Yoda had them doing handstands, levitating rocks, and other challenging exercises. As Luke and Leia continued their training on Dagobah, they found themselves doing handstands next to each other, levitating rocks with the Force. In this exercise, Leia was surpassing Luke, much to his chagrin. Luke suddenly lost focus and fell to the ground. Despite being relatively new to the ways of the Force, Leia seemed to have a natural aptitude for it, and her progress was coming faster than Luke's. It made him feel like he was failing somehow. Leia, however, continued to maintain her balance, impressing Yoda and Luke with her skill. Luke wasn't angry with her, but he couldn't help feeling a twinge of jealousy towards her. Rather, he was frustrated with himself for his lack of certainty in his abilities, which had caused him to fall. Yoda had taught him that failure was an essential part of learning, and that he needed to learn from his mistakes and move on. So, he got up and continued with the training, determined to improve and grow stronger in the Force. Leia's concern for Luke was evident as she helped him up from the ground. They then noticed their Y-wing sunk into the swamp, and Luke tried to lift it out but failed. Leia gave it a try and lifted it out more than Luke, but also failed. Yoda then instructed them to work together to lift the ship, but they still fail. Frustrated, Luke insisted it was too big for them to lift, and Leia then stated that she knew this Jedi training wasn't meant for her. The siblings sat next to each other, and Yoda shared his iconic "size matters not" quote with them. As they walked away to clear their minds, Yoda surprised them by lifting the Y-wing out of the water himself. As Luke and Leia continued their Jedi training, they performed another handstand while levitating objects around them. However, Luke lost focus as he saw a vision of Han and Chewie in danger, causing him to fall and drop the objects he was levitating. Leia, on the other hand, remained focused and didn't fall or drop her objects. She only stopped when she heard Luke yell out that Han was in trouble. Yoda then explained to Luke that he needed to learn control and that they had seen the future. We then cut to Han, who approached Cloud City in one piece and met his old friend, Lando, just like in the original timeline, except Leia is not present here. Back on Dagobah, Luke prepared the Y-wing for takeoff, getting his supplies ready while standing on the ladder. Yoda told him he must complete his training. Leia walked up to the ladder and suggested that Luke might be right. Luke told Leia that he couldn't get the vision of Han out of his head, asking her if she didn't care about Han. Offended, Leia responded that there was no use in saving Han if they weren't prepared. Leia had reservations about departing Dagobah too soon because she hadn't fully grasped the concept of being a Jedi or using the Force. The unfamiliarity of these things made her hesitant to confront Vader in battle. As a skilled Force user, he could easily overpower her if she wasn't properly trained. The potential risks were too great for her to ignore. As Yoda continued to insist that they shouldn't go, Luke became more determined and asked if they should let Han die. Suddenly, they all heard Obi-Wan's voice, and he said that Luke didn't know that. Leia heard the voice too, and while it wasn't familiar, it felt so to her. Then, the ghost of Obi-Wan appeared and told Luke that not even Yoda could see his fate, and that the future was always in motion. Obi-Wan encouraged Luke to trust in the Force and let go of his fear. Leia was surprised to see Obi-Wan as he appeared before them, just as Luke described what he saw on Hoth. Leia did not immediately recognize Obi-Wan at this moment, as in this timeline, she was never rescued by him as a child, since this timeline follows the original George Lucas story, and the Kenobi show is not canon in this timeline. Obi-Wan greeted Leia, saying that it was good to see her again, and referred to her as Princess. The last time he saw Leia was from a distance aboard the Death Star, shortly before perishing to Vader. Obi-Wan apologized for the loss of her father, and that he couldn't help her in time. Leia said that his apology wasn't necessary, but she appreciated it. She added that her father Bill spoke very highly of him, and that she was honored to meet the great General Kenobi. She then turned her attention back to Luke. Luke told Leia that he couldn't believe she was not more concerned for Han, given their friendship. Leia was offended, corrected him, and repeated that they were not half as ready as they needed to be. Luke said that was all the more reason for her to come with him, as together they would make a full Jedi, but Leia wouldn't listen. Seeing that Luke would go no matter what, even alone, Leia decided it would be better if she came along to help. Yoda told her that she must at least stay to finish her training, as losing both would be catastrophic, but Obi-Wan said that Luke would need Leia's help. Outnumbered, Yoda was defeated. As they left, Yoda said he told Obi-Wan that training both would be a mistake, that matters were worse now. Obi-Wan said they were their only hope. Yoda lamented that there were not others. Luke and Leia arrived at Cloud City on their Y-Wing, and made their way through the pristine, clean hallway with R2 trailing behind. As they turned the corner, they both stepped back, to avoid alerting Boba Fett to their presence. Leia sensed that Han was in the carbonite slab, and took a quick peek, and they continued down the hallway. When R2 started beeping, Boba Fett spotted them, and began shooting. They rushed down the hall, and saw Chewie being taken away into a room. Leia sensed that she shouldn't go in, and was hesitant, while Luke rushed in without a second thought, and the door shut behind him. Leia told Luke she would find another way in. Luke made his way into the carbonite chamber, and the rest played out the same as it did in the original timeline, except for Vader's first words to Luke. The Sith Lord spoke to Luke, telling him that the Force was with him, but he was not a Jedi yet. As Luke got closer, Vader mentioned that he had sensed a greater presence, alluding to the combined presence of Luke and Leia, of which he had no knowledge. This had the Dark Lord curious. Meanwhile, Leia and R2 tried to find the others, and eventually ran into Chewie, who was choking out Lando. She intervened, but didn't understand what was going on, until Lando explained that he had no choice, and Leia's instincts told her that Lando had something to do with Han's capture. She began to argue with him to get an understanding of what was going on, and why. Lando caught her attention when he said that there was still a chance to save Han, and Leia commanded Chewie to let him go, and followed Lando inside. Leia took her blaster and began firing on the Slave One, but it was too late. Stormtroopers started shooting at them through the doorway, and Leia ran to the side with her blaster in hand, following Lando inside. She then asked Lando what happened to Han, and he explained that Vader had used him as bait to test the carbon freeze chamber so he could lure a man named Skywalker inside. Leia realized that Luke was in danger and muttered his name under her breath. She told Lando to head towards the Falcon with Chewie and R2, and that if she didn't return, they should leave without her, which they did. Leia stormed off to find Luke, and R2 decided to go with Lando and Chewie to fix the hyperdrive on the Falcon. Leia was frozen in fear and confusion as she watched the duel between Vader and Luke play out in the distance. Although she couldn't hear their conversation due to the strong winds, she could sense how terrified Luke was and the physical pain he was enduring. As Luke fell, Leia cried out his name, believing him to be dead for a moment. Vader immediately turned around and saw her on the walkway, with her green lightsaber ignited. Leia ran off and made it to the Y-Wing, flying away. Just like in the original timeline, she heard Luke's cries for help and found him under the antenna, safely helping him into the secondary cockpit of the ship. Leia followed the Falcon, and they successfully escaped the Empire. As the medical frigate cruised through space, Luke and Leia found themselves lost in thought, staring out at the galaxy before them. The events on Cloud City had left them both shaken and exhausted, but they were grateful to be alive and together. After a time, Leia made her way to Luke's personal quarters to check on him. She found him sitting on his bed, staring off into the distance.
Luke,
she said, taking a seat beside him.
How are you feeling?
Luke hesitated for a moment before answering.
I'm fine,
he said, but Leia could sense that something was wrong.
You don't have to hide anything from me,
she said, placing a hand on his shoulder.
I can feel that something is troubling you.
Luke took a deep breath and then, with great reluctance, revealed what Vader had told him on Cloud City, that he was his father.
Your father?
She said, her voice filled with disgust and confusion. Luke nodded, his eyes fixed on the floor. Leia sat in stunned silence, struggling to process the revelation that Luke had just shared with her. The man they trained to confront, the man responsible for so much death and destruction, was also Luke's father. It was too much to bear, too much to comprehend. Leia's heart sank as she thought about all the pain and suffering that Vader had caused, and the realization that he was still out there, somewhere, left her feeling hopeless and alone. Luke looked at Leia with a mix of sadness and determination. He knew that their journey was far from over, that they had to face Vader and defeat him once and for all. He also knew that he couldn't do it alone, that he needed Leia by his side. He placed his hand on hers and gave it a reassuring squeeze, silently promising her that they would get through this together. As they sat in silence, both lost in their thoughts, Leia couldn't help but feel a sense of despair. They had just narrowly escaped the clutches of the Empire, but now they faced an even greater threat. Vader, the man who had just revealed himself to be Luke's father, was still out there, waiting for his chance to strike. Leia knew that they couldn't let him win, but as she looked at Luke, she couldn't help but wonder if they were strong enough to defeat the Dark Lord. As we enter the events of Return of the Jedi, our tale picks up as Luke and Leia snuck into Jabba's palace together on a mission to rescue Han. Luke ordered Chewbacca to stay at the entrance and guard it. The twins then found him. Leia held Han as he was unfrozen from the carbonite slab. Han was relieved to hear Luke and Leia's voices. Just like in the movie, they are shortly caught, and Han attempted to negotiate with Jabba, but he is taken away. Leia is also taken away, forced to become one of Jabba's slaves. Some of Jabba's thugs found Chewie and brought him before them. The Wookiee was then placed in shackles and jailed. Luke threatened the Hutt by ordering him to release Captain Solo, the Wookiee, and the princess to him. The rest of the sequence played out very similar to the original timeline. Luke fought the Rancor and successfully killed it. We then skip to the sail barge battle, which plays out the same but with some small differences. When Luke ignited his lightsaber, Leia ignited hers too. Prior to launching Luke's into the air, R2 passed by her and discreetly gave her the lightsaber. Leia waited for the right time to break free, which was on Luke's signal. Due to the earlier sequence of events, Leia was forced to engage Boba Fett inside the sail barge, since he was there too. The moment Leia broke free, she killed Jabba sooner by stabbing the Hutt through the chest. Leia fought Boba Fett inside, causing a lot of damage. And due to the tight environment with barely any space, Boba Fett was forced to go outside, where he had the tactical advantage against the trained princess. While Luke was occupied outside, helping Han and Chewie, and fending off the other thugs, Leia was engaging with Boba Fett on top of the sail barge. R2-D2 snuck from behind and distracted Boba Fett by stunning him with his taser. This made Fett turn around and kick R2 over, leaving the back of his jetpack exposed, which allowed Leia to lunge at him and slice his jetpack, which caused Boba to fly over the railing and into the Sarlacc pit. Leia then cleared the top of the sail barge, so Luke didn't need to jump on. She then used the turret to set it to shoot the sail barge. Leia then swung onto the skiff. Han, Chewie, and Lando went on the Falcon, heading for the Rebel fleet, while Luke and Leia flew to Dagobah on their Y-Wing. As they arrived on Dagobah, Luke and Leia found themselves inside Yoda's humble hut. When Luke expressed his concern for Yoda's well-being, Leia's expression betrayed her own worry for their Jedi Master. Yoda eased himself into his bed, and as Luke helped him with his blanket, Leia sought to offer comfort to the little green sage. As the twins explained that they needed his help to complete their Jedi training, Yoda calmly informed them that they required no further tutelage. Instead, he impressed upon them the necessity of confronting Vader, emphasizing that only by facing the Dark Lord could they become true Jedi. When Luke queried whether Vader was his father, Yoda confirmed the truth of his lineage. The remainder of the scene played out as it had in the film, with Yoda passing away peacefully, as Luke and Leia looked on. In the aftermath, the twins took solace in each other, their grief palpable as their mentor transcended to the Force. Luke and Leia walked outside and approached their Y-Wing, where R2-D2 was making repairs. They stood together and gazed at Yoda's hut, seeing the lights inside dim out into darkness. Luke and Leia expressed to each other that they cannot do this alone, referring to the need for a master who can guide and teach them. In the scene, Luke and Leia heard the voice of Obi-Wan saying that Yoda will always be with them, and the ghost of Master Kenobi appeared as he walked forward. Luke walked up to him as Leia stayed back. Luke then asked Obi-Wan why he didn't tell him the truth of his father.
Obi-Wan, why didn't you tell me? You told me Vader betrayed and murdered my father.
The scene unfolded as Obi-Wan expounded his perspective, and the exchange between the three followed a similar course.
A certain point of view? Your father was seduced by the dark side of the Force. He ceased to be Anakin Skywalker and became Darth Vader. When that happened, the good man who was your father was destroyed. So what I told you was true, from a certain point of view.
Leia approached them as she stood by Luke, unable to hold her tongue any longer. She interjected with a firm tone, addressing Obi-Wan. Her words were laced with frustration and disappointment, and it was clear that she was not content with Obi-Wan's previous explanation.
Master Kenobi, you cannot be serious. You didn't tell Luke the truth. You muddled it.
Leia, you're going to find that many of the truths we cling to depend greatly on our own point of view. Luke, Anakin was a good friend. When I first knew him, your father was already a great pilot, but I was amazed at how strongly the Force was with him. I took it upon myself to train him as a Jedi. I thought that I could instruct him just as well as Yoda. I was wrong. There is still good in him.
Good in him? He stood by as Tarkin destroyed my homeworld. My parents were on Alderaan that day. He is a monster, Luke. He nearly killed you and tortured Han.
Leia is right. You cannot escape your destiny. You must face Darth Vader again.
Leia stood silently, unsure of their ability to confront Vader. She knew they weren't powerful enough, but deep down she understood that it was what they had been trained for. She could sense the weight of the burden they now carried, the responsibility to restore peace to the galaxy. And while she was afraid, Leia knew that she couldn't let that fear control her, but couldn't help it. She had to be strong, for herself, for Luke, and for the rebellion.
I can't kill my own father.
Obi-Wan turns his gaze to Leia, sensing her uncertainty.
Then it seems you must face Darth Vader, Leia. But Yoda spoke of another. The other he spoke of is your twin sister. But I have no sister.
Lucas stopped mid-sentence as the realization hits him. He turns to Leia, looking at her with the same shock he had when realizing Yoda's identity prior.
Leia, you're my sister,
he exclaims. Leia's eyes wander down. She is stunned by this news. She meets Luke's gaze again and says,
I know. Somehow, I've always known.
Obi-Wan motions his classic subtle smirk. A spark of joy fills him as he witnesses Anakin's children acknowledge their family relations. They both turn to look at him.
Your insights serve you both well. Bury your feelings deep down. They do you credit, but they could be made to serve the Emperor,
Obi-Wan advised. Leia is confused and asked, how is this possible?
To protect you both from the Emperor, you were hidden from your father when you were born. The Emperor knew, as I did, if Anakin were to have any offspring, they would be a threat to him. That is the reason why you were unaware of each other until now.
Leia stands up and storms off, feeling betrayed by the revelation.
Bail Organa is my true father. Not that monstrosity you call a good friend,
she exclaims. Obi-Wan delivered one last word of wisdom to Luke before fading away. Afterwards, Luke approaches Leia to check on her and asks if she's going to be okay. Leia says she was fine, but Luke could sense that she wasn't. He tells her that he knows what she's feeling, because Vader's connection to him as his father was a shocking revelation to him on Cloud City. Leia tells Luke that he won't have to worry about her feelings getting in the way of the mission. She knows deep down they both will have to confront Vader and the Emperor. They agreed that they'll need more time before confronting Vader. Such an act would need careful planning, and both Skywalker twins don't share the same idea on how to confront the situation. Leia remained unsure of their abilities to confront Vader, but deep down, she knew that they must do it eventually. It's what they were trained for. When Luke and Leia arrived at Admiral Akbar's ship to join Han's strike team on Endor, Han greeted Luke with a warm smile. As he turned to greet Leia, he noticed she looked a bit distraught. Concerned, he asked her what was wrong. Leia hesitated for a moment, before telling him to ask her again sometime. Though Han was puzzled by her response, he let it go for the time being, knowing they had more pressing matters to attend to. As the crew bypasses the Executor to land on Endor, both Luke and Leia sense the presence of Vader. Leia tells Han that they shouldn't have come, fearing that their presence may endanger the mission. Meanwhile, Vader can feel the presence of Luke and Leia, but he is still unaware that Leia is his daughter. He doesn't understand why he has a connection with her. The early Endor sequence plays out similarly, except for Leia, who now wields her own green lightsaber in the speeder chase scene alongside Luke. On the Death Star, Vader was standing before Palpatine. He reported that he had sensed his son's presence on Endor, along with the presence of a Jedi, the Princess of Alderaan. Palpatine, revealing that he had foreseen this, orders Vader to Endor to ensure that Luke and Leia surrender themselves to him. Palpatine also noted that Luke's compassion for him will be his undoing, but he is not worried about it, as he can manipulate the situation to his advantage. Palpatine explains to Vader that he also foresaw the princess will be dragged along with Luke. She does not share Luke's compassion, and that divide can be used to their advantage. Vader assures him that he will take care of it, and leaves to carry out his orders. Later on Endor, Luke emerged from the Ewok hut and walked out onto one of the bridges. Leia noticed his departure and followed him.
I know what's troubling you, Luke.
Leia said, catching up to him.
It's troubling me too.
Vader is here. Now, on this moon.
Luke replied, turning to face her.
He can feel when we're near. That's why we have to go. As long as we stay, we're endangering the group and our mission here.
We should run away, far away.
Leia suggested.
If he can feel our presence, then we must leave this place. We aren't ready yet.
No,
Luke said, shaking his head.
I must face him.
Leia's eyes widened in disbelief.
What?
Because there is good in him. I felt it. He won't turn me over to the Emperor. I can save him.
No, Luke, it's too dangerous. If you confront Vader, he'll kill you. Don't you remember what he's done to us? To you? He stood by while my planet was destroyed, Luke.
I know it's hard to believe, Leia, but it's the only way to save him. I have to try.
He's a monster, Luke. I can't believe he could come back from that. He's too far gone. He'll kill you.
If he wanted to kill me, he could have on Cloud City. He wanted me to join him, to confront the Emperor, and I refused. He may choose the path of evil, but he has no friendship with him anymore. He won't turn me over to the Emperor.
Leia sighed, looking away into the forest as she collected her thoughts.
You won't take no for an answer, will you?
You know I can't.
Luke said softly.
Come with me. You'll see the good in him, as I have.
Leia hesitated before finally nodding.
I will go with you, Luke. But know this. If what you say about Vader isn't true, if he tries to kill you or turns you over to the Emperor, I will destroy him. The first chance I get.
Luke knew he couldn't dissuade her now, and he silently said,
Thank you, Leia.
Shortly after, Han appeared and watched as Luke and Leia slipped away into the night, headed for the Imperial facility. Han's suspicions that Luke and Leia had hooked up in his absence would be all but confirmed. In the following scene, Luke and Leia surrendered themselves to the Imperials nearby that brought them to Vader. As Luke told Vader that it was the good part of him that spared him on Cloud City, and the same part was the one causing Vader to be conflicted on whether to listen to Sidious now, Vader became uncomfortable and changed the subject.
Princess, I was not sure of what I saw on Cloud City. So, you have become a Jedi.
Just as much as Luke. And more than a match for you, Vader.
I wouldn't be so sure, Your Highness. Your friend did not fare so well against me.
Leia decided to bluff somewhat.
He's come a long way since then, Vader. And he's got a lot of talent, being your son and all.
He's inherited much of my skill, but he still doesn't have the strength to defeat me.
Vader pulled out Luke's saber and moved to address him. Leia spoke up.
I won't hold back my strikes like he might.
Vader looked back in surprise, and Luke shot Leia a glance.
Luke may see some good in you, but all I see is darkness.
Vader was disheartened and moved on to Luke. When he activated Luke's saber, Leia flinched.
I see you have constructed a new lightsaber.
Later, when Vader told Luke that he didn't know the power of the dark side, and that he must listen to Sidious and bring Luke to him, Leia quickly wrenched Luke's saber from Vader's grasp with the Force. She used it to break her handcuffs, and Vader quickly threw his cape to the side to protect the prisoners from the troopers standing guard, and pulled out his lightsaber. Leia and Vader locked sabers briefly. Then Vader quickly knocked the saber aside, sending Leia off balance and crashing to the floor. When she got up, Vader had her at saber point, and the troopers quickly restrained her and gave the saber back to Vader. Luke pleaded with Vader to stop, but he told him that it was too late for him, and that the Emperor would show them the true nature of the Force. Aboard the Death Star, Vader escorted Luke and Leia towards the Emperor. A cold chill went down Leia's spine as she sensed the strong presence of the dark side within Palpatine's throne room. After revealing to the Skywalker twins the operational status of the second Death Star, they witnessed in horror at the decimation of the Rebel fleet. As a response, Leia resolved to kill the insidious Emperor earlier than her brother. However, her efforts were quickly quelled by the intervention of Darth Vader, and a fierce duel ensued. The Emperor goaded Luke with a choice: succumb to the impulse to strike him down and let one of them die, or intervene in their duels, sparing the Emperor. Opting to bide his time and intercede in the conflict between Vader and Leia, Luke displayed a newfound clarity, recognizing the folly of attacking the Emperor outright. Nevertheless, this decision inadvertently emboldened Leia, manipulated once again by the malevolent machinations of the Emperor. While Vader had no desire to harm Luke in this confrontation, Leia perceived him as a hindrance to her goal of slaying Palpatine. Before Luke could calm her, Leia recklessly hurled him aside, incapacitating him temporarily. As he struggled to regain his footing, Luke contemplated a way to rectify the situation. In her remorse, Leia provided an opening for Vader to eliminate her, but she narrowly evaded his attack. In the heat of the moment, she accidentally revealed to Vader their kinship through her feelings, much like Luke did to Vader in the original timeline.
You cannot evade your destinies.
My destiny is to destroy you!
Give yourselves to the dark side. It is the only way to save your friends. Yes, your thoughts betray you. Your feelings for your friends are strong, but not as strong those you have for each other. Yes, you two are brother and sister. I had sensed something more between the two of you. Obi-Wan was wise to separate you. Now his failure is complete.
Vader's attention turns to Leia, who stands face to face with him.
I am impressed by your conviction, daughter. Not many would knowingly try to destroy their own father. Certainly not your brother. You would be quite the asset to the Emperor.
Enraged by his words, Leia lashes out at Vader, but he holds back, not wanting to harm his daughter. Meanwhile, Leia, reinvigorated by Luke's helplessness and Vader's taunts, fights fiercely and accuses Vader of turning Luke against her when she injures her brother. Eventually, Leia gained the upper hand by cutting Vader's hand off. As she prepares to kill him, Luke's hand touches her back. Luke shows her his own and warns her that she's following the same path as their father. Leia attempts to justify her actions, doubling down saying that she was only trying to protect him, but Luke assured her that he doesn't need her protection, and that she is worth more to him as his sister than his protector. As much as Sidious may then try to encourage her to finish the job, he would fail. They are Jedi, like their father before them. Luke discarded his lightsaber, while Leia retains hers tightly in her grip.
So be it, Jedi.
Palpatine warned the twins of the consequences of their actions, unleashing a barrage of Force lightning on Luke, rendering him defenseless. Leia, determined to protect her brother, drew her lightsaber and deflected the lightning, but the sheer power of the attack overwhelmed her, causing her to be electrocuted as well. As in the original timeline, Anakin intervened, preventing Palpatine from killing his children, thus fulfilling the prophecy and restoring balance to the Force. Leia was astonished to witness Anakin's compassion and selflessness, which made her understand why Luke had always believed that he was capable of redemption. The twins then assisted Anakin out of the throne room and down to the hangar, where he expressed his desire to see his children with his own eyes. Subsequently, Luke removed his father's mask. Upon seeing Anakin with his mask removed, Luke and Leia are stunned. Anakin asks to be left to die, acknowledging that his children had already saved him. In this timeline, Leia is present and hears Anakin's words firsthand, sparing Luke the burden of having to deliver the message that Luke was right about Vader. Anakin passes away soon after, leaving Luke and Leia to grieve. Leia embraces Luke in an attempt to console him, and the twins hastily flee the Death Star before making their way to the moon below. After arriving on Endor, Han would witness Luke and Leia's close bond and assure Leia that he wouldn't come between them. However, Leia would reveal that they were not romantically involved, but rather siblings. Han would be bewildered, but glad. Later, on Endor, Luke and Leia would hold a funeral for their father, cremating him in a large pyre. As they watched the flames rise, the siblings would hold each other tightly in a comforting embrace. Despite her shock and confusion about Vader, Leia would eventually find it in her heart to forgive him, just like in the expanded universe. Since Leia had been trained by Yoda in this timeline and became a Jedi much sooner, going through the trials and tribulations with Luke on Dagobah and the Death Star, her son wouldn't have been sent away with Luke, nor fallen to the dark side. Instead, Leia would take it upon herself to train Ben in the ways of the Force, keeping him close and protected from the machinations of Snoke and Palpatine. This likely would have influenced his future. Leia would have had to drop her political aspirations and focus on her Jedi training, founding the new Jedi Order alongside with Luke, as a member of their High Council. With her strong sense of justice and compassion, Leia would have been a great teacher, guiding young Padawans to become strong and wise Jedi. Leia would have likely have remained a Jedi throughout the sequel trilogy. In this alternate universe, the future is up for your interpretation, as it isn't truly set. However, one thing is clear: with Leia as a Jedi Master, the galaxy would have had a powerful protector, and the dark side would have been hard-pressed to find a foothold.